Joanna, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me today, Casey.
I'm excited to talk about this topic today because it's not our usual topic. It's cars, vehicles, for the most part. I know it'll flow into other things, but that is something that I'm interested in. I just love technology, and to me, like cars are technology, especially the way things are going. Vehicles, electric vehicles, and we obviously know that it has a huge impact on our environment, and that is exactly what you're working on, is to help that. So maybe before we get into it and I get into all the questions that I have, why don't you share a little bit about who you are and what you're working on right now?
Sure. So I'm Joanna. I'm a senior policy advisor at Clean Energy Canada. We are a think tank based out of Simon Fraser University in BC, although I'm in Ottawa, and we work to advance climate policy and clean energy solutions across the country. I have been spending the last little while focused primarily on clean transportation solutions. A lot of conversations around electric vehicles, fuel efficiency, modernizing our public transit systems, things like that.
And you shared some stats with us before time. So I want to give people a little bit of a background on why this is important. Is one of the stats that you shared was domestic carbon pollution from the transportation industry has increased by nearly 30% over the last 2 decades, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that's pretty big. Like what kind of, like it's easy to throw out percentages and numbers and stuff like that, but what does that mean exactly for Mother Nature, for planet Earth and climate change?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start by saying the transportation sector in Canada is a big source of our overall carbon pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. It accounts for 25%, and it's the second largest source next only to oil and gas. And so most of us don't think that the cars that you and I drive are that big a part of the climate change problem. But in fact, it is a pretty significant contributor. In terms of what it means, countries around the world, including Canada, are signing up for net zero emissions by 2050. So that means we want to emit less emissions than we are able to capture either in, nature-based ways like trees or technology, carbon capture and storage. And we want to be producing more kind of clean energy, renewable energy. So that means we need to get down to zero pretty much. So reduce our emissions as much as possible. Transportation sector in Canada is going on, unfortunately, in the opposite direction, right? We're seeing a rise year after year by a third of overall emissions. And a big reason for that is the cars that we drive. And so Canadians now more than ever are choosing larger, more polluting vehicles like SUVs and pickup trucks.
Yeah, so I have to say I'm a culprit. I have a pickup truck for obvious reasons, not just because I wanted a pickup truck, but part of me does want a pickup truck, but but I also put it to use, being in the industry that I'm in. And if there was an electric pickup truck that was reliable, there isn't even really any. There's some coming out. I kind of stay in touch with this because I am, like I said, I'm interested in this world, and I think there's a lot of potential there. Where do you see that? Like, where's the automotive industry going? Because, like I said, there's electric cars coming. Tesla's been out for a long time, and I'm seeing a lot of manufacturers like Volvo's committing to things. I'm seeing emails from Mercedes committing, making certain commitments. I don't know what all the big dealerships are doing, but like I think Chevy has the EV Hummer coming out, which is essentially an electric pickup truck, and then there's a couple startup companies too that are doing a lot of trucks. Like, are you seeing a lot of that? And are you seeing an adoption for that? Because it seems like that's the way the world's going, whether we do anything about it or not.
Absolutely. This is the direction the world is going. The future of vehicles are electric, and not just cars, but everything from ferries to forklifts, and there's even some electric planes that we're seeing. One of the first electric planes just took flight in BC, actually, I think at the end of last year. So yes, this is the direction we're going. There's sort of there's two main factors or influential forces. One is governments. So, jurisdictions around the world are increasingly signing up for these bans on internal combustion engine vehicles. California, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, they've all said that they're phasing out the sale of new gas cars by 2035. Quebec has said the same thing. The UK is trying to, win that race, and recently increased its timeline or moved up its timeline to 2030. BC, British Columbia, it's 2040. So yeah, the world is moving fast, and I think that the future of the internal combustion engine vehicle is pretty limited. it's gonna go extinct pretty soon. And so automakers are responding to this. And as you said, we're seeing a record number of targets and commitments of, electrifying a certain portion of all the cars that they sell. And then we're also seeing a bunch of new electric vehicle models coming to market. I've heard 2021 be called or be coined as the year of the electric pickup truck. So we're getting an electric version of the Ford F-150. I believe that's Canada's top selling vehicle. So that's good news for those who want to drive pickups and also go electric. We're also, you mentioned the Chevy Hummer. There's going to be an electric version of the Jeep Wrangler coming out, Toyota RAV4, all in the next couple of years. And then we do have some pretty rad startups coming into the mix, like Rivian and Nikola. They've got their pickup trucks, and they look very futuristic. I'm curious to see what the appetite is for that. But basically, I guess what this is all telling us is that driving an electric vehicle, it used to be only the people that were virtuous, right, and wanted to do right by the environment. And now it's becoming this exciting, the technology lovers and those who want their new kind of toys and new vehicles, those people are getting pulled into the mix too. It's becoming more of a lifestyle choice and a cooler thing to do.
Yeah, and if you've ever driven an electric vehicle, it actually drives a lot nicer than a combustion engine vehicle. You don't have the sound if that's what you want, but you have everything else that is way better, in my opinion. One of the things I feel like 2040, like that's still 19 years away. It's, for me, it still seems like a long ways away. Like, is that soon enough, in your opinion, to stop producing those or allowing those vehicles to come in? Because obviously once it's forced, there's still going to be all sorts of other vehicles that are still on the road, right? Like it's not like they're just going to disappear all of a sudden. What happens at that? Or do you feel that that's quick enough?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked both questions, is a 2030, 2040 timeline way too fast? Can we really change that quickly? But then at the same time, is it fast enough if what we're working towards is net zero emissions by 2050? So I think this is where we have to start. I actually think the timeline, the 2035 timeline, it is pretty ambitious, given where we are and like you said, even if we focus on new sales, we're still going to have, the typical lifespan of a car on the road in Canada, I think, is 12 years. So, all of the gas-powered cars that are getting sold today, they're going to be on the road for 12 years unless we speed this up. So I think the next 10 years is going to see a pretty rapid and exciting transformation. In terms of the types of the number of models that are coming online of electric vehicles, people's familiarity with electric vehicles, and moving from it being a kind of a fringe technology to something that's mainstream. And then just sort of a behavioral or cultural change where right now it can seem scary to plan a big road trip, when you need to be charting out the charging stations along the way. day, or not knowing what happens if you get stuck in a snowstorm. But I always like to think of, look at how fast we integrated smartphones into our lives, right? And every night I plug it in to make sure it's charged the next day. I've got extra battery packs, or I know where I can find an outlet at Starbucks if I need it, if I'm out in the day and I lose charge. So I'm excited to see how quickly everything transforms, because that's what we need to do if we really want to address climate change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I actually read an article the other day. I believe it's a company out of Israel. Anyways, they came up with a battery for a vehicle that can charge in less than 5 minutes. Like the
I saw that
technology
too.
for it. Yeah. Did I get it right? Is it in Israel? Yeah.
I'm not sure where it came out of, but you got the
Okay.
5 minutes right,
Yeah.
and that's the most important
Yeah.
part. No matter where that battery is coming from, everybody's gonna want it, so it's gonna be everywhere fast.
I think that's the amazing thing about technology, right? Is that exponential growth, right? Technology grows exponentially every couple of years or 18 months in some cases. And that is what's going to be what really helps us. And our human minds, our linear thinking minds can't really comprehend that. Like the amount of changes that we're going to see in the next 10 years, like just think about what we saw in the last 10 years, and that's just going to go exponentially faster, right? So like by our kids, we were talking about our kids before we were officially recording, right? They're going to see a lot in their lifetime, but it's not like they're much younger than us at this point, right? So
It's true. And I think that's important for us when we're thinking about how our lives will change. A lot of people think that our quality of life needs to go down if we want to address climate change, and we need to make all of these sacrifices. And sure, to the extent that you can choose to walk or bike, do it. It's great for our health as well. But with technology, we can still have great lives. We can have comfortable, affordable, fun lives, and EVs are a good example. They, like you said, they are quieter, they're smoother, they're more comfortable, they're more modern. They get updates, software updates from the cloud. You don't need to necessarily always go in to the mechanic to fix the quirks. And so yeah, I
yeah,
think
and there's less things to break on them too, right? There's less moving parts, so you won't be going to
yes,
the mechanic as often.
absolutely. You save hundreds of dollars per year on fewer maintenance and repair needs.
Now I have to ask, I don't know how much information you have on it, but the question that we'll always get is batteries, right? How sure burning fuel is not good for the environment, but what about all these batteries that inevitably have to be made and then eventually disposed of when they stop working?
Yes, so great question. Battery technology has been developing rapidly. We've seen the cost of batteries fall by 90% over the last 10 years, and we're seeing a lot of experimentation on different battery chemistries. Specifically ones that use less materials and use fewer materials that have a lot of human rights issues and environmental issues associated with them, like cobalt, for instance. So that's great news on the front end, or the upstream of the supply chain. You're right that at the end of life, that piece of the puzzle, I think, really needs to get figured out, and it needs to get figured out fast, because we're just about to come up on the first wave of batteries that are reaching the end of their life, and countries around the world need to know what to do with them. So the first thing I'll say is that when an EV battery is no longer holds enough charge to stay in a car, it still has about 50 to 70% of its capacity. So it can often find a second life, whether it's as energy storage in the electricity grid, or, I've heard stories of them being used to light stadiums in Amsterdam, or go in refrigerators at 7-Eleven in Japan. So there are going to be second uses for the batteries. But then after that, they will need to be recycled and disposed of safely. And a key piece that we need to think about there is recovering as many of the raw materials that we can, like the lithium and the cobalt and the nickel, and kind of reintroduce those back into the supply chain. And so there's actually a few leading Canadian clean tech companies who are doing that. There's one called Li-Cycle. I believe it's based out of Mississauga, but certainly somewhere in Ontario.
Sorry, what's it called
Um,
again?
Li-Cycle, Li-Cycle. And their technology is able to recover, upwards of 90% of these materials and reintroduce them back into the supply chain. And there's another company called, I think it's like Recyclico, and that's a BC-based company. But Canadian clean tech startups are emerging to solve this exact problem, and I think it's an important one to think about now versus later.
Yeah, I think that's so great that those companies are already emerging, because one of the things, like as an entrepreneur, your brain just works differently sometimes. But whenever there's a problem, that just means there's an opportunity, right? So all of these problems that people bring up, well, then somebody else is looking at it like, okay, well, there's a great opportunity for a business that obviously can help the environment, but also create a good lifestyle for all the people who work for that company, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no shortage of opportunities. Us humans are pretty resilient, but we definitely have to do our part to take care of this planet, or else we'll just be ejected. I always tell people, like, planet Earth was here before us; it'll be here long after us. If we don't cooperate, it's just going to get rid of us, right? So
yes, until we figure out how to move on to Mars, right?
Yeah.
That's the next techno challenge.
Yeah, and then Mars will eject us eventually too if we're not nice there. But so be nice. So, have you seen a difference in the amount of carbon in our footprint size since COVID has started over the last 9-10 months? Because obviously there's less buildings being heated. I know we're talking automotive, but a lot of these buildings are now sitting vacant, and we're driving a lot less because we don't have to go into the office. Do you have any stats on that, or have you seen anything change?
Yeah, so globally last year, greenhouse gas emissions dropped by 7%, largely due to less air travel and lower industrial activity. Those are two big global emitters. So obviously that's great news, but the way that we're living our lives right now, which is incredibly limited, I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think that's going to go on forever. And there's a real risk of what I've heard called revenge emissions, where as soon as the economy and life gets back up and running, we're gonna see emissions explode again. So I think there are some of these trends that are gonna last. I think the work from home networks and technologies and systems that we've set up, we'll see more of that. But I don't think that's going to make enough of a difference in our overall emissions profile. And so this focus on electric vehicles is a big one. If we do want to really cut our carbon pollution in transportation. One other thing I'll say is that as much as we've seen some positive trends, there are some offsetting negative trends. And so one example in the auto context is that more and more people are buying personal cars and driving personal cars because they're afraid of the health risks associated with public transit, for instance. More and more people are moving out of cities because they want more space, more access to nature, into the suburbs, living in bigger homes that they're heating and cooling and lighting, and then having to drive further distances to the places that they do need to go. So, we'll have to see how all the cards fall after COVID is over. But no matter what, we want to be electrifying buildings, transportation, and industry as much as we can. And then, of course, decarbonizing our electricity grids, which Canada is already pretty far along in doing.
Yeah, you have a lot of good points there. And the fact that there are a lot of people, like we've seen, like the housing industry is obviously doing really well, but people aren't spending money on travel. So they're spending on other places. When I purchased my truck, because we have a few trucks, so I got a new truck for the vehicle, for the company. The Toyota dealership was saying that they had the salesperson I was dealing with had the best month he's ever had in his career, right? He sold like 42 pickup trucks that month or something like that. Or I don't know if those pickup trucks would be, it might've been 42 vehicles, but he's never done, that's more than a sale per day, right? In a month, which for a salesperson is obviously good. So people are just itching to spend their money somewhere.
Exactly.
My next question was actually going to be around, well, how do you feel about car ownership? Because there's also autonomous cars coming to life, and which essentially allows us to share vehicles, right? So instead of having to have a garage or a parking spot for a vehicle, you can just call your vehicle on your phone. It comes and picks you up and brings you somewhere, and then it continues on to pick somebody else up. But it kind of goes back to your comment: do people want to get into cars that are being shared with other people?
Yeah, I think eventually we'll get back to that, right? So I have hope for the future of public transit and ride hailing and whatnot. In terms of how it impacts emissions, so autonomous, I guess first ride hailing had these high hopes of kind of displacing car ownership, right? Making it easier for people to choose to not own a car and just rely on ride hailing. And the idea was that overall transportation emissions would fall. We unfortunately have not seen that. Instead, what ride hailing has substituted is people riding public transit. And so it's had a net negative impact on emissions, or we're seeing more emissions because of things like Uber and Lyft. Luckily, they are making some pretty exciting commitments to be carbon neutral and offsetting their emissions, or trying to electrify their fleets. So that's good news. For autonomous vehicles, I can't say that I've really attacked this topic in enough detail, and I feel like there's a lot of people who haven't. We know it's coming, and it's always just sidebar, but I'm aware of pros and cons. One pro is that I've heard it can help get rid of all of the parking, or a bunch of the parking spaces in inner cities, because often when it's a one car per person situation, I drive my car into the city, park it at work, and it sits there all day. So you need these large parking lots. Whereas if I did not have my own car and I relied on these autonomous vehicles that are constantly moving and picking up different people, they don't need that space to just sit all day. On the other hand, they're constantly moving, which means they're constantly emitting emissions. And, I don't know, like for Uber, for example, those cars are trolling and waiting for a little bing to hear, to go pick up a customer. And so there's a lot of kind of wasted emissions there. And
Right.
there's a possibility that would happen with autonomous vehicles, unless the logistics and the routes were so optimized that, there wasn't a lot of wasted idling or trolling around.
Yeah. I feel like cars, I don't know. I feel like the way we use vehicles is going to change as well. Like I remember making a joke. I think it was like a few years ago. I was talking to my brothers, and we were just talking technology because we like that stuff. And I'm like, soon we're just going to have like rooms attached to our house, which will detach and then just bring us somewhere, and we won't even really know, right? And then I actually saw an article where I think Nissan is making a vehicle that's essentially a office on wheels, right? So it's autonomous. And you basically, so I could be like in my office and working away while it's driving me to the job site or something like that. I'd be like, I'd buy that in a second, right? So, which just forces us to work more. But anyways,
I was just going to say, I'm also, as a side topic, I'm really interested in the culture of overwork. And that just sounds like we don't even get to listen to a podcast or daydream on our commute anymore.
Yeah, that's totally true. So one thing I want to actually get into too. So going back to the families buying SUVs before we were like officially recording, we're thinking of like as a mom, you feel like you need to be safe, and the moms would buy the SUV to keep their kids safe, but then they might have 3 kids, so they need a van, they need a big vehicle anyways, right? So I don't know if that's driving some of the purchases. However, there is a certain lifestyle that comes with these vehicles. Like it's when you have an SUV and you have a big family, those are typically the people who also like to do outdoor activities. Let's all hop in the truck and, throw our skis or our snowshoe, whatever, and we're going to go out. So on one hand, they're taking advantage of nature and doing what they can. But on the other hand, they obviously have this big vehicle to go out and use nature to its fullest sort of thing. So I don't know, like, do you see that people are going to have to make lifestyle changes for these electric vehicles, or are we just, obviously electric trucks are coming out in SUVs, so maybe it's something that doesn't really matter at this point?
Yeah,
We're just playing the waiting game.
Yeah, I think this year and next we'll see a big inflection point where the electric versions of these larger vehicle models are coming out and will make it easy for families to both go electric and drive the cars that they want and need. And like you have kind of driven home this entire chat, making climate conscious choices easy to integrate into one's lifestyle, like that's the sweet spot that we want to hit, because not everybody can make huge sacrifices. It's one thing to want to drive an SUV or a pickup truck, and it's another when you need to because of your family size or the nature of your work. And so, I think it's just really important that we provide those options for consumers to achieve both.
One last thing I want to touch on was actually in your notes was with regards to manufacturing and how Canada, I don't know what it's like in North America, but you're obviously working on the Canadian side, has significantly dropped in what they manufacture. So what are you doing on that front, and what are you looking into? And is there an opportunity for Canadians to get back into manufacturing, and for that to, well, for one, that helps the environment if we're not shipping vehicles overseas or wherever they're coming from. And two, it helps the local economy for wherever these vehicles are being produced as well. So that's something that you're working on as well, then I understand.
Yes, that's a big focus of our work. As we have kind of outlined in some of our reports and whatnot, we see these two troubling trends. One is that our transportation emissions are going up. And then the other trend is that our auto sector is on the decline. And so over the same 20-year period, we've seen the number of vehicles produced in Canada drop by about 1 million per year. We were once in the top 5 vehicle manufacturers around the world, and now we don't even make it into the top 10. And so this is both a bad story for our environment and for our economy. But we are seeing kind of recent signs of change. So as of last fall, Unifor, which is the largest union representing auto workers in Canada, struck a deal with Ford Motor Canada, and then after that, Fiat Chrysler, which is now Stellantis, to bring EV production here. And we thought it was really interesting that the auto workers themselves, they see the future as electric, and they see that as being the way that they secure good jobs. And then the last development was that I think just a few weeks ago, GM announced a similar production deal where they're going to start producing their EV 600, which is an electric delivery van in Ingersoll, Ontario. And so that's like 3 of the 5 big auto assemblers in Canada. They're starting to build electric vehicles here. We want to see that continue. Right now, globally, there's a race of who's going to capture this economic opportunity. And we've got governments in Germany and France and China, soon to be, under Biden in the US. They're all trying to support their manufacturing sector to become leaders and global leaders in producing EVs. So we'll see. Right now, China is, dominating, where they account for over half of all EVs produced and sold.
Yeah, there's a huge company. Is it Neo? Neo, I think, is the big company that's really a lot of investors are watching too. They're watching that one, but
Yeah, full disclosure, we are invested in Neo and like to see just how crazy the stock price goes. Yeah, I mean, they're really taking off, and the Chinese government has been very supportive of its EV sector. So there's a lot of homegrown companies there. But yeah, we're calling for government support and a strategy to bring EV battery manufacturing here in Canada. We've got all of the metals and minerals needed to build EVs and their batteries right here. Most other countries can't say the same. We've got, world leading battery researchers, great clean tech industry, a very robust auto parts supply chain, and an automotive heritage. And so, and even at the end of the life cycle, we talked about the battery recycling companies that are, emerging to fill that space. So we've got all the ingredients we need, but I think we need a little bit more of a deliberate strategy to set our auto sector up for success, particularly when Biden is coming in with that exact same goal, and they tend to move quite quickly in the US. So Canada's got to get in the game.
Yeah. Well, obviously there's, some doom and gloom depending on how I want to look at it, but there's a lot of good things happening as well. I definitely like to focus on the good things, and it seems like you do too. So, and you definitely shared a lot of the good news. So that's great. What is something that we, like the individuals, can do at home, like an action step or multiple action steps that they can do to help support this and to push it forward, or to maybe to support the more automotive manufacturing coming to Canada, if there's anything like that, anything that we can do to support?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a few ideas. The first is consider buying an EV for your next car purchase. In our polling, more than half of Canadians already lean towards an electric car as their next vehicle, and the majority see EVs becoming mainstream in the near future. So, put your foot on the gas or the accelerator in the EV context.
Can't call it the gas anymore.
Yeah, and go out and actually make that decision. The second one is to get educated. So I think few folks are still, or a lot of Canadians and people around the world are still not that familiar with EVs, and they're reluctant to make that switch. It's a new technology. But at least in Canada, there's a few options. One is that there's a bunch of EV owners groups. There's an EV Society of Canada, and then there's a number of chapters across the country. And those groups are a great resource. First, people who do own and drive an EV are pretty enthusiastic about it. Once you go electric, studies show you don't really go back. And they love to tell you about it. So these groups are a great place to get your questions answered and just talk to people who've been driving these cars for years. And there's another organization based out of Toronto called Plug and Drive. And they just released about a week ago a great tool for Canadians to see all of the EV models available in Canada and then compare them based on cost, battery range, and their lifestyle needs. And it'll also point you to all of the incentives that are available to help you purchase those cars federally and at the provincial level. It'll point you to a list of electricians that'll install the charging station at home. So get educated. And the very last one I wanted to say was, if you are interested in going electric, make that interest known to key decision makers. So that includes governments and electing, the right people who are advocating for EVs as well, but also decision makers like your condo board or your building manager. If you're a renter and you're in an apartment building and you want to buy an EV, but there's no place to charge, go and tell your building manager that or your landlord, because those are the exact sorts of people we need to get on board and influence to sort of make the change. And then similarly, go to your car dealership. Right now, 7 in 10 car dealerships across Canada do not have a single EV in stock. You can't go purchase or test drive. And if you want to purchase one, you often have to wait 3 to 6 months for it to arrive. So go to your dealership, tell them that you want an EV. Like right now, they say there's not enough interest. And, we think there's a bit of a mismatch between what Canadians say they want and what dealerships are saying they're hearing. So make that interest in going electric known to the decision makers who matter.
You mentioned incentives. Are there any incentives right now?
Yes. The federal government offers up to $5,000 for a new EV and $2,500 for plug-in hybrid electric. The range depends on how big the battery size is, I believe.
Okay.
And then Quebec and British Columbia offer provincial incentives that you can stack on top. So in Quebec, for instance, folks who go move out to Chelsea, you can get 8,000 from Quebec, 5,000 from British Columbia, and there may even be some municipal incentive. So, that ends up totaling to at least 13,000 you put towards a new EV.
Sorry, in Quebec, you can get an incentive from British Columbia? Is that what you just said? Okay.
No, sorry. In Quebec, you get 8,000 from the provincial government and 5,000 from the federal government.
Okay.
Stack them on top.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, more good news. So that's good to know. Nothing in Ontario, unfortunately. Just the federal.
We used to be able to get up to 14,000 just provincially.
We got that, I think, on our Volt that we had. So we got a pretty big incentive when we purchased that, which was good. But
no, when the Ford government came in, they removed those incentives.
All right. So Joanna, thank you so much. This has obviously been a lot eye-opening, right? But also inspiring too, to see that, we can make a difference and that the world is moving in the right direction, right? But we have to do it together. We can't just expect somebody else to do it. We all need to do our little part, and you're doing a big part actually by doing what you're doing on the policy side and getting the message out there and continuing to spread this. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thanks for having me today, Casey.
And one last thing, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, ask you any questions, what's the best way to do that?
Shoot me an email. I'm at joanna@cleanenergycanada.org, or you can look me up on the website. But happy to answer any questions or, send you to whatever resources I can share.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.